It's Harsanyi time, everybody. Our friend David Harsanyi in the mix from nationalreview.com, where he is a senior writer. Mr. David, final live show for me for the year. Thank you so much for joining us and all your various appearances here. We appreciate it.
It is a pleasure each and every time, Buck.
So tell me this. Fauci is out there, and for the first time, one of my points that I make about Fauci, and because I think you have a very interesting take on this, is that whenever there's reason, he's very quick to say, well, even if there's like a 1 in 1,000 chance of that thing happening, let's take the most cautious, and I would say overcautious and even authoritarian approach possible. And then when there's good news, like for example about schools, I don't know, why isn't Fauci on TV with a public service announcement saying, open the schools? Schools should be, there's no debate about this anymore. Right? It's always the negative stuff that he's very clear on. But the positive, we don't get to hear from him. Why isn't he telling people get rid of outdoor masking to this day? Completely baffles me. There are mandates for outdoor masks in some states. There is zero science to back this up. There's no study that says it's a risk. It's crazy. Okay, he won't say that. But finally, he said we've gone too far. What did he say it with, David?
Well, when people brought up that we might need a temporary travel ban from Britain because they have some kind of super spreader, virus. I think it spreads 70% faster or something like that than the strain we have. He called it draconian. And I am just taken aback by the way that a lot of these elites and expert class people talk about the world. It's not draconian to tell to tell families they can't visit each other on Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's not draconian to shut down the schools for a year. It's not draconian to destroy entire industries like the restaurant industry in New York, even though I think studies show that 1%, they're 1% of the spread. It's not draconian to tell people they can't go to church, despite the Constitution clearly laying out that is a right of people to do. So, this is the problem when you talk about science. Now, of course, when most of the time when people talk about science, they're just preening on about things that have nothing to do with science. But the thing is that it's not just about science. It's about a lot of other things in society. And having the science lead us all the time, it creates the situation you just mentioned, where we have public health officials who only care about the science. They don't care about the social interaction, meaning, the emotional importance of that kind of thing for society, or they don't care about the rights of people. And then you have them saying that's draconian to shut down airline flights. I don't even understand it. It's just arbitrary. And it's doesn't sound very scientific to me.
What do you think is going to happen when with the incoming administration here? I can't really decide in the early stages. I mean, I'm gonna have to see how this plays out. But I was someone who, and I think I've said this to you, we've talked about this on earlier shows. I knew starting around August, oh no, they're not. The plan here is not to have the great Biden reopening if he wins. The plan is going to be to continue the lockdowns, the control, and maintain power in certain hands long after any reasonable person could think that was something that should happen. And we are seeing now, I believe that is at least the early stage plan. But do you think that they're going to just make a lot of noise about how they're doing things like the Biden administration separately from the states and people like Cuomo and Newsom are doing things so differently now when they're really not? Or do you think they're actually going to take concrete actions that are supposed to be making a difference here in the course of the pandemic? You see what I mean about the distinction?
There's literally nothing they can do that they couldn't do before, right? I mean, it's not like Donald Trump stopped them from doing anything. Yesterday, Nancy Pelosi was on, talking about this ridiculous bill that they just passed, and then she claimed that Republicans are purposely spreading it, basically. That they don't believe in science. And then she jumps over to how, suddenly we have this vaccine out of nowhere, right? So Republicans are anti-science, but yet also pro-vaccine, but also anti-vaccine. It doesn't make any sense because, in my view at least, there is no real way that they have no real plan, and there is no real way to fight in a respiratory disease like this, right? No one's doing better than us. Germany's not doing better. England's not doing better. I mean, essentially, we're all doing the same. So every little power they take is a new standard that they've set to take power in the future. And that's why it upsets me so much when I talk about this stuff. I don't know if that answers the question, but I just feel like every time they take power, there's really not a huge amount of scientific basis for it. It ignores the Constitution many times, and it's just a new power that they arbitrarily take that they're never going to give back. And that, I think, is very dangerous for the country. And that, I think, is going to be, listen, it's a tragedy. We've lost a lot of lives. I'm not trying to diminish that. But you also have to think long term about the sort of governance we're going to have moving forward. Biden will completely never complain once about anyone taking too much power, I assume, right, in some states. So that might be the only difference.
Speaking of David Harsanyi, he's a senior writer at National Review. And yeah, David, my expectation is that what you're gonna see is like, this is like the 100 days of masking. I mean, I look around and everyone who's saying this out loud as though it's an intelligent point. I just want to yell, we already have there's no data set that disagrees with this that I've seen anywhere. At least 80, more like 90% mask compliance across the whole country. So in states that require masking, people are wearing, because you can't go to the store, you can't go shop. I mean, you can't do it, right? So if they require them, you're already wearing them. So their game change maneuver is to essentially put out, I mean, this is really what I was leading to with the initial question, and you clearly see it the same way, is that it's effectively going to be a PR campaign. Biden comes in and it's the same stuff that we see, except there'll be no pushback on the tyrannical side. I think the DOJ will be unwilling to be, and I have criticism of the DOJ up to this point. I think they've just said, look, we don't want to get in the middle of the pandemic fight. Like, we don't want to be suing states when they say they're trying to save lives. But yeah, they'll make it easier for the autocracy about COVID to continue. But I don't think they're going to do really all that much differently at the federal level. I mean, federal buildings are going to require masks. Federal people are already wearing masks. I have friends who work in these agencies. They're wearing masks. That's already happening.
Yeah, it's a complete fantasy, purposely. It's a complete political fantasy or partisan fantasy to say that we're not wearing masks when as you mentioned, every study shows that most people wear masks. You can't go into stores where this spreads, where there aren't masks. There aren't churches that are like, most churches I know, for instance, Catholic churches near here, before they had to do anything, they had all kinds of, social distancing rules in place and mask wearing in place. I mean, people are careful because most people are conscientious. Even if they don't believe it works, they do it to make their neighbors feel better. This was just sort of an attack on red states, which still, incidentally, in most cases, do just as well as any other states. Florida is just as good as California, better than New York. So they keep changing their arguments. Yeah, I don't see them doing anything else. I do worry, as you mentioned, and people sort of like to snicker at this because it sounds overly idealistic, but there is no coronavirus exception in the Constitution, and you have no right to tell people how to act on a personal level in the way government has been doing. I don't care that there's an emergency or not, and I just don't see governors giving. I have to ask you, I mean, no one has answered this question for me. What is the use of the Constitution if every time there's an emergency, you get to just ignore everything that's in it? No one needs it when we're just doing what we're supposed to. No one needs free speech when you're saying things everyone likes, right? No one needs protection of religious freedom when no one's bothering you. This is when we need it, and this is when it's being ignored by Michigan, by New York, by California, et cetera.
I couldn't agree more. I keep saying the Constitution is not a suggestion box. This isn't like I just went for a meal at Chili's and I want to tell them that they should get me my chicken tenders faster, right? The Constitution is supposed to withstand these moments of crisis. And I think we'd have to all look at this and say it really hasn't. And, yesterday when I was on Outnumbered on Fox, I brought up, because we're doing this whole, look, China is a major threat. I've been saying that for the 4 years we've been focused on Russia, that China is a much bigger problem long term for a host of reasons. Russia is a manageable issue. It's a problem, but it's a manageable issue. China may not be manageable over the long term. So we got big issues there. But we're talking about Chinese censorship. And I kind of had this moment, and I said it on air. I said, well, yeah, I mean, granted, they're not going to throw you in prison for saying the wrong thing on Twitter, but we've absolutely moved in this direction now. I mean, there is state-sanctioned, allowable speech about major policy and political issues that you will be shut down for saying the wrong things about. It's true about elections. It's true about COVID. I mean, what could be more important than allowing a free and open debate about these lockdowns? There are major institutions. There's free speech as a legal principle, but there's also free speech as a concept. And our major institutions that are supposed to be defending free speech, the news media, social media platforms, they've abandoned ship. Or actually, it's worse than that. I shouldn't even strike that from the record. They're part of the pirate ship that's taking over the ship of free speech. They're actually the offenders.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with everything you said more. The free speech is a legal concept. We have the First Amendment, but it's also a liberal concept that we're supposed to believe in our everyday lives. But we have most of the major media, and we've talked about this many times, not pushing back against it, participating in the suppression of speech that they don't like because for whatever reasons, which is just an illiberal outlook on the world. Now, if you read one of my favorite history books is Modern Times by Paul Johnson, sort of just a history of the 20th century. And every single time and I'm not saying with Nazi Germany or anything like that, but every single time you see people taking power they shouldn't have, it's on the heels of some emergency or imagined emergency or overstated scaremongering, etc. Every single time. And that's what happens here. This is how you corrode individual liberty. Now, I don't know that people are that idealistic about it anymore, frankly, unfortunately, because I see polls and most people are fine with these things, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong. And that to me is even a more dangerous and scary sort of portend of future events.
I don't mean to be a bummer as we're speaking to David Harsanyi. He's a senior writer at nationalreview.com. Check out his latest there. And whenever I start with I don't want to be a bummer, it usually means I'm about to be a bummer. But I also think that the full economic and just societal devastation from the lockdowns. Now, granted, the body count is very high from COVID. It's terrible. But the way this has been presented to us all along was, well, that will be much less if we do all these other things. And now we're seeing the other things. I mean, David, over 80,000 people, it's looking like over 85,000, I think, as of right now, died of drug overdoses in 2020. Highest that it has ever been by a lot. And that's not even including missed cancer screenings and all these very real ramifications. I think that this is going to be a little bit like, when sometimes if you have a bad, if you got like a bayonet wound, you don't know how bad it is until the bayonet comes out. I think until the lockdowns, really end, and then people realize, well, what happens to all the delinquent mortgages, and what happens to what happened to all these businesses that haven't made any money in 9 months? I mean, I think then people realize, what did we get for this?
That's also a great way to, a great point. I mean, the negative externalities of the lockdowns are going to be immense for the economy, for our lives, for kids' lives. Or, in third grade, I think is the grade where you see if the kids need help, and if you help in reading or whatever, and if you don't intervene, it gets worse and worse, and things like that. I mean, how many children are going to suffer because of this? How many depressed people have killed themselves, etc. Drug overdoses. It's just terrible, and we're supposed to weigh these things now. Let me ask, I mean, does anyone really believe that if we had not locked down, things would have been that much worse on the COVID front as far as the deaths go? I don't know.
I keep, I show this, and the president retweeted this graph, so that got me a lot, or this comment, and it's gotten me a lot of unwanted attention online, David, as that can happen. I'm sorry, it's not possible to be a reasonable person and look at what's happening in California right now, an entirely blue state. There's no Trump, no masking, lobby in California. Doesn't exist. An entirely blue state that was saying that they had crushed the virus before. It is not possible to look at not just their cases, but their hospitalizations and their overall COVID problem and say, yeah, they had this figured out. It would have been much worse if they hadn't done all these things. I don't think a reasonable person could say that. And they're saying it all the time.
Yeah, I don't pretend to have some great expertise in this, but it just looking at the world, looking at Sweden and other places, I'm not saying it couldn't have been marginally worse, but I think weighing what the cost of this will be for society in the long run, like you said, we can't keep passing bills and giving people $600 checks. First of all, it's not going to help them. Secondly, in the long run. Secondly, start thinking about what mortgages and rents and all these things we've sort of suspended. This is real property. People have given loans. This money just doesn't disappear simply because people don't pay it back, or the loans don't, and rent as well. People own those buildings. They're going to need to be paid. There's already a backup. And that sort of cascades into other problems, as we saw in 2007 and 8 and things like that when you have a real estate market. So I don't predict anything terrible. I don't know how these things are going to play out, but it's hard for me to believe that there won't be real cost to this societally as we move forward. And then when you ask yourself, we just blindly followed, Dr. Fauci or whoever else. And I'm not trying to just blame him. This is the whole expert class was saying these things. Was it worth it? And I suspect that it probably was not worth it because we still have many, many deaths. I think that it would have been far better to protect and to be honest, we didn't exactly know how this, in the beginning, what was going on, but to protect populations that needed it and allow other people to move forward with their lives. And we didn't do that. And now there's going to be but here's one last thing. The thing was they never switched it up, right? Once we knew that it was the older folks who were the potentially going to die from this, they never switched up their ideas. It was always the same. It was always lock it down. Don't let people go to school. Don't work. Let the teachers' unions run the schools, etc. And that, I think, is where, not at the beginning, but later on, where there's the real problem lay for us and where the real mismanagement of our society lay.
David Harsanyi, everybody, nationalreview.com for his latest. David, always appreciate you, my friend. Happy New Year to you, and we'll talk to you as soon as we come back.
Thank you. You too.
This holiday is a little different. It's tougher to see people. People are going to keep their distance. There's all these restrictions, and, people are being cautious. And that means you're not going to see as many folks as you're used to over the holidays. But for the people who matter in your life, you can still send them beautiful flowers to bring them some holiday cheer with BloomsyBox. That's what I've done. My girlfriend loves them. My family loves them. You can even set up a monthly subscription, and these are fresh cut flowers right from the farm. They stay looking beautiful for weeks. It's incredible. And we're getting you a great deal right now for this holiday season. So you can reach out and see the look on someone's face over Zoom or FaceTime. When they get these flowers, they'll send you a photo of them. They look amazing. Go to BloomsyBox.com. That's BLOOMSY box.com. Use the promo code BUCK. That'll get you 15% off and free shipping. BloomsyBox.com. 15% off with promo code BUCK, and we'll get you free shipping. Send some holiday cheer to people with BloomsyBox.
On at least 3 occasions, maybe 4, but at least 3, we offered another $500 billion in relief, only to be blocked by Democrats here in the Senate. Speaker Pelosi was candid. She basically said, well, this is about politics. We don't want President Trump to get credit for Congress stepping up in a bipartisan way to provide relief to the American people in the run-up to the election.
That's what you have to know about this giant bill and what happened and what led up to this point. There's really nothing else that you have to know. There's really nothing else about this in terms of the process. There's a lot about the bill itself, but I mean, in terms of why was it so delayed? Democrats delayed it. That's why we waited months for this. And why did they do that? Because the misery of the American people was to their political benefit. Senator John Cornyn there is absolutely correct. I want you to remember that, not just because it feels like there might be some accountability if enough Americans going into the ballot box in not just 2 years, but in a couple of weeks. This Georgia Senate runoff is essential, okay? So let's not forget that when we talk about the political battles ahead, I'm not saying, in a far-off land, in a time, long since forgotten. We're talking about as soon as we come back from the Christmas season and Christmas break, we're going to be in this Georgia runoff. So I want as many, and we have a lot of Team Bach in Georgia, a lot of people that listen to this show down in Georgia, and I want people to remember that the Democrat Party made people suffer because it was in their interest politically to do so. And people's anxiety, their businesses made it worse for everyone. That is Pelosi's legacy in the 2020 year of COVID. Trying to play games, holding the American people hostage, denying them money they deserve and are owed because she says so. I recently got a crash course in home title theft, and you better pray this crime never happens to you because it goes after your most valuable asset, your home. Here's how it works. The bad guys, cyber thieves, they use a quitclaim deed to kick you off, put themselves on, and take loans against the equity in your home, right? They kick you off the title, then they replace you with them. So they're acting like they're the people that can take out those loans, and they do. You don't find out about this usually until the payment demands arrive in the mail, perhaps even a foreclosure notice. You have to go with the experts I trust to protect yourself because the usual identity theft services don't protect you, but Home Title Lock does. Go to HomeTitleLock.com, use promo code RADIO. That'll get you 30 free days of protection, and you can check online to see if you're a victim of this crime and don't even know it yet. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code RADIO, 30 free days of protection, and you can check online to see if you're a victim of home title theft and don't know it yet. HomeTitleLock.com, promo code RADIO.
Unless you stop the virus everywhere, you don't stop the virus anywhere. What's frustrating to me is we've learned these lessons. We went through this in the spring. We saw how COVID came and the federal government had no idea. You know, everything was retrospective. COVID was coming to New York back in February. It came February, March, April. And the federal government didn't even know it. They thought it was still in China. They didn't figure it out until much later. Let's at least learn. And when you have all the EU countries banning UK, you have the UK itself closing down. What other signal do you need? New York has one of the lowest infection rates in the United States. We're the fourth lowest state in the nation. But I can't protect New Yorkers unless we protect the entire country.
Governor Cuomo can't protect anyone. That's what we've actually learned. He's not protecting people. This is not true. The things that he has done, the decisions that he has made that people have opposed at different phases of this have been wrong. And the biggest one, of course, was sending COVID-positive seniors back into nursing homes from the hospital. And that had disastrous results. This notion, though, this slogan that he trots out here about how unless you stop COVID everywhere, you don't stop COVID anywhere. Yeah, that's true in a sense, and that's why we're not stopping COVID. What world is he living in? It is not stopping in America. That has not happened. No one has stopped this thing. Some have dealt with the spread better than others. But anyone who tells you that we crushed the virus or we flattened the curve, or those are all delusional statements. But they're invested. They can't admit now that what they've been saying didn't really matter. What they've done, that the additional pain they've piled on top of this pandemic was unnecessary. Do you think you're ever going to have politicians who will tell you that? They'll never admit that. How would you ever want them in charge of anything ever again if they had to go around and tell people, you know what, we destroyed entire industries, we put millions, tens of millions of people out of work, and we didn't need to do it. It was a decision that we made because we were cowards, we were ignorant, and we were fearful. And exploitative, because they've used this. Look, let's remember, for Democrats, the single most important political goal of 2020, the single most important one, was that they wanted to defeat Donald Trump. So they look at everything they did this year, and you have to keep this in mind. They look at all the decisions that were made, all the shutdowns and lockdowns and everything else, and no matter how painful it is, no matter what the analysis shows about this after the fact in time, they will be happy with the outcome of the lockdowns because the lockdowns created the environment for elevating Joe Biden. The lockdowns, for anyone who doubts me or disagrees with me, the lockdowns were the basis for the mail-in balloting changes that were the absolute, the sine qua non, the absolute necessity for the Democrats here was to get that change so that they could open the doors to the fraud and the irregularities that we saw in the election. That was the COVID lockdowns were part of the excuse. So they leveraged COVID policy as a weapon against Trump, and it was effective for them. We know that it was effective. They go on air and they blame the president for hundreds of thousands of dead people in this country. as though every other country in Western Europe, in South America. I mean, do we really believe that some of the small island Asian nations, for example, or smaller island Asian nations, or a country like Australia, we think that they're so much better at dealing with this virus, or that it's, if you're a country that can cut off all contact with the outside world and you have a small enough population that you can monitor it very, very closely, you'll forestall this for a while. Although Japan is now actually starting to have cases growing in larger numbers too. Is that likely, or is it more likely that some populations, especially in Asia, have already been exposed to enough COVID viruses because of their proximity to China, which is where the flu strains come out of China year in and year out? That's what ends up happening. It has to do with the massive livestock populations and the proximity to human beings and the zoonotic transmission that occurs out of Asia. And then that's how you get seasonal flu year in and year out, right? Avian flu, swine flu originate in Asia, usually in China, and then they make their way around the rest of the world. Now, I know that coronaviruses are different than influenza viruses. I always think it's noteworthy, too, that we call it influenza in reference to what the Italians called it around the Renaissance period, because they thought it was the influence of the stars on people that was causing them to be sick. So even our name for it shows a real ignorance, a lack of understanding of the intricacies and the realities of a disease like the flu. We know some stuff about it, but there's a lot we still don't know. And with COVID, that's certainly still the case. But do we think that some of these countries in Asia, for example, are really similar to us in the way that the virus could be tackled and the way that their populations have dealt with it? Or is it a better approximation for us to have European countries to be compared with us? They have, more, we're geographically more similar. And when you look at that, there's no way you can make an argument that Donald Trump is the reason for all of this death. It's simply absurd. It's obscene, but they continue to do it. They continue to say things that no honest person could believe, but they like this because it allows them to justify everything that they've done. And that's why it's going to be so hard to get them to think differently at all about any of this. They're going to continue this narrative, is what I'm telling you, that it's all Trump's fault, because eventually we're going to look back at these lockdowns. We're going to look back at what has been done here and realize that this was disastrous.
Intuitively, it's all ready. I believe that. Because if it's been flying around the world, it will be here. And I say that intuitively because I have an educated intuition, because I lived this and you lived this.
Also, I am not a total moron all the time, and so I am aware of the fact that by the time it is on the front page of major newspapers, a virus that is spread very, very rapidly is probably already here. Yeah, you don't say. What a shock. Thanks, Cuomo, you buffoon. This is why this talk about shutting down flights, I'm seeing people saying this. We wanted to shut down flights from China because we thought that we didn't realize where the virus had already spread to. We also knew that there was a tremendous hot zone in China, and we needed more time to figure out what we were going to do. But we've had a lot of time to figure out what we're going to do now, and this virus has been in free circulation. There's no reason to believe that this is limited to the UK. The more transmissible strain of this, they say it's 70% more infectious, and they think maybe it's more infectious among children. But again, okay, even if it is more infectious among children, it is at, I don't like to say no risk, because then people will come at you and they'll say, well, look, 2 out of 10 million kids that got this have died from COVID, which is about what the number is. Your chances, if you're under 18, of dying from COVID-19, if you have a normal immune system, are like 1 in a million. I mean, they're actually, I don't mean 1 in a million as an exaggeration. I think it is about 1 in a million. It's infinitesimal. But if I say no risk, they'll say, oh, but people died. You're lying, right? So it's very, 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 look, entirely acceptable risk. And that's really the phrase here I want to hone in on. Entirely acceptable risk. We have demagogues and authoritarians and a cowardly media that are all working together right now to eliminate the possibility of you being in charge of determining what is acceptable risk when it comes to viruses and health for you and your family. They're making all these decisions for you because when we push back, they say, oh, but there's risk for other people, so it's not risk for you. It's about spreading the virus. And to this, I want to say, yeah, but there's also my freedom, my liberty, and the Constitution at stake here. And there's always been risk to other people from human interaction of aerosolized viruses. I'm also going to say this now, and I want you to remember that I said it. Asymptomatic transmission has been exaggerated. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying it's not a concern. It has been exaggerated. Why? I know it's been exaggerated because if they had stronger numbers, we would see it all the time. But what they do is they have these largely anecdotal studies to push asymptomatic transmission because then you can't be relied on to avoid other people if you could feel totally healthy but still spread this virus. Think about that. We're all hiding. We have all these problems because of a virus that we've been told almost 50% of the time, 40% asymptomatic spread was what they were saying in the beginning of the summer. We were told spreads where people don't even know they have a virus. That is for most people the degree of lethality and danger that this virus is for them. They don't even know they have it. I mean, if you have a bad case of strep throat, you're going to be in misery for a few days until your antibiotics kick in. You get this, you don't even know you have it, is what they tell us. Now, I think that asymptomatic transmission, asymptomatic cases, I'm sure it's very widespread. Asymptomatic transmission doesn't make sense. Let me ask you this. Now, sorry, let me go back for a second. It's not that it doesn't exist, asymptomatic transmission. It's that as a widespread problem and cause of this disease, that doesn't add up. Why would this disease spread so easily among asymptomatic people, but other viruses out there, what seasonal influenza, different viruses, does not spread so easily among asymptomatic people? It may be pre-symptomatic people, and that's a different thing. Do you shed a lot of virus right before you show symptoms? Yes, that is true of other things. So it may be true of this one as well. But what we are told to believe is that this is an outlier in that you could be 3 days into an infection, feel totally fine, go for runs outside, go lift some weights, feel totally fine. And people are around you and you're just shooting virus at them all the time that can infect them. That's unique. We know this. That's unique compared to other diseases. And where is the really hard evidence of that? Where is the hard evidence of it? Well, they won't provide you with hard evidence because they lack hard evidence. That's the truth. They have a lot of anecdotal data and do this or else. And remember, much of what they've done here is also premised on we can't wait to see real data. So we're going to tell you do this based on the data because we can't wait. And if we see how it actually would work in reality, we'll already have suffered too many casualties. That's the way they force us to do all these things. They kind of put a gun to all of our heads simultaneously and say, obey us, because by the time you figure out we're not correct with our COVID policies, it'll be too late. I'm sorry, that you think we're not correct and we are correct, it'll be too late. That's their premise. It's just madness, friend. This whole thing has gotten so out of control. And I've been saying this for a long time. Here we are, lockdown 2.0, big second wave. Why isn't New York City being hit more by this? I think it's important for us to think this one through. Why isn't New York City being hit harder? We have super high population density. We have a lot of people, essential workers and others who are still, I'm going into an office every day. I've had friends recently who have come down with COVID, so it's very much out there. But New York City has about half the positivity rate based on testing, and I know there's a lot of ways testing skews this debate, because how much testing are you doing? The people that say, oh, testing doesn't create cases are being intentionally obtuse. They're being morons, right? Because the point isn't that it's if you test a lot of people and there's a high false positive rate, and on top of that, you're catching more of the COVID that's already out there compared to previous testing when you were doing less and therefore you weren't seeing as much COVID. There are real reasons why the numbers are skewed. That's obvious to anyone who thinks through this. But I would just note, I would return to, why does New York City have a lower positivity rate than the rest of New York State? And I think the answer is, well, I shouldn't say the answer is. An explanation for it is, in the serology testing that we did back in May or June, we saw that about 20% of New York City had been infected. That was the official number based on the extrapolation of a large number of blood tests looking for antibodies. 20% of the whole city. Since then, we've obviously had far more cases, and we also did not catch. I mean, the 20% was probably a low figure. It might have even been 18 or 19% officially, but it was a low figure. And you've got to add at least another 5 or 10% on top of that for what's happened since then. So you're getting close to a third of the city would already have had COVID and had antibodies. So while we're going around masking and distancing and doing this whole dance we've been doing the whole time, and in New York City, we're where California was over the summer because everyone's patting themselves in the back. Look what a great job we're doing. Well, are we doing a great job, or do we just have a large percentage of the population that is effectively no longer at risk to this disease? And did we already lose so many of the highest risk individuals in the nursing homes that, yes, right now we're going to look like we're better off? You see? What Cuomo has done, Cuomo is like a general who loses all of his soldiers in the first engagement of a war, and then 3 months later at the command staff headquarters is saying, well, I have the lowest casualties this month. Well, yeah, it's because you lost everybody in the first engagement. You lost everyone in the first battle. And there's some truth to that as a way of understanding what's happening in New York, and as I'm sure it's true in other places as well. That really what Cuomo has overseen here is a disastrous first response with casualties and spread of the virus so high that now in the second wave, New York City still has problems. People are not all immune to this. I get that. But in the second wave of this, what you have are people, a large number of people who can't get it, which slows the transmission dramatically. And of course, they're going to say it's masks and social distancing. But whose theory makes more sense, mine or theirs? Whose theory makes more sense? Look at California. Look at Florida and New York. Whose theories make more sense? Who is actually supported by the data, and who's part of this, cult of the magical mask? It's what Dr. Fauci, your mask is magic. I didn't think it was at the beginning of the year, but so much science has changed since then. Yeah, what science has changed? Oh, the bureaucrats got a little taste of power. That's what changed.